enslaved people who worked this land and were never paid. But as a proud descendant of enslaved people who built this land with their bare hands and were buried in its soil without dignity, without markers, and without peace. I am 74 years old, and in my lifetime, I have witnessed how our people's stories were silent, how our sacred spaces have been erased, and how corporations like Formosa Plastics believe they can pave over our history as if our ancestors never existed. So today, I want to speak to you that we will never allow that to happen again. We have filed a lawsuit to protect and honor the final resting place of our ancestors, to defend what is sacred, to uphold what is right, and to demand the justice they were never given in life. These are not just graves, these are sacred grounds, and they are being threatened by bulldozers and barbed wire by legal teams and security guards. Our community has suffered the cost of greed for far too long. During slavery, it was the brutal sugar plantations where our ancestors were beaten and worked to death, all to turn a profit for plantation owners. Since founded in the 1950s and the 1960s, it's been oil, gas, and petrochemical companies who have bought out almost all of the land that once was part of the plantation economy, while local, parish government, and the state have paved their way to rezone the agricultural land for industrial use. Every day, they poison our community by polluting the air, the land, and the water with carcinogens and other toxic pollutions and waste. That's why the same area between New Orleans and Baton Rouge that was once known as Sugar is now called Cancer Alley, bittersweet. Formosa is no exceptions to that rule. They are based in Taiwan and want to build their plastic plant here because the emissions would be so great and toxic that their own government would never let them build close to their home. This is about respect. It's about our rights, not only under Louisiana law, but under the Constitution of this country to care for our ancestors. It is about correcting the lingering harm of slavery and standing firm in the face of those who would profit from our pain. One of my ancestors, Harriet Jones, was born into slavery. And in 1874, just a few years after emancipation, she purchased 34 acres of land. That land is still in my family today. That tells us how much our people have fought to build something lasting. Inclusive Louisiana was founded to fight for our community, for our health, for our land, and our history. This lawsuit is not separate from that mission. It is the mission. Though Formosa Plastics may be powerful, they do not have what we have: the truth, the law, and the unbreakable strength of our ancestors behind us. Today, Inclusive Louisiana stands with our partners, guided by justice, supported by history, and rooted in righteousness. I pray that the courts will hear our cry and that our people will finally receive the honor they are due. Thank you. And with that, I will pass it to my dear friend and colleague, Gail LaBeouf. Gail.
Hello, everyone. I'm Gail LaBeouf, co-founder, co-director of Inclusive Louisiana. We are here today making history, not HIS, his history, but ours. We filed this lawsuit against Formosa for Simon, Betsy, Stanley, and Harry. We stand on the tired shoulders of our 5 ancestors against Formosa, a Taiwanese-based corporation seeking to build a $9.4 billion plant with 14 plants on top of our slave ancestors' burial site in St. James Parish on the Formosa Bona Vista land. Formosa cannot build this massive pollutant plant in their own country, but wants to build on top of our ancestors' grave, or pile their remains, creating a hill along their property lines, or make a road as the farmers has done according to today's laws. We say no to this status quo. Our slave cemeteries have been desecrated far too long not to challenge this practice. With this lawsuit, we seek to put headstones by their final resting place on the Formosa Bona Vista plantation site. We further seek to have that consecrated burial site be given to the descendants and maintained by us, the descendants. We envision a place where all future generations can come to pay their respects, not only to these 5 souls, but all the souls buried on the Bona Vista property. We must remember that these people were so brutally mistreated, denied all basic human rights that landowners lavish on themselves. We ask for all the rights given to other cemeteries be extended to Bona Vista Cemetery. We to come and go as one pleases, lay flowers, pray at the foot of our ancestors' graves. This February in 2025, a rainy, cold day, we went to pay homage to our ancestors. We were met by guards for Formosa, giving us a glimpse of what our ancestors must have endured. We as a people cannot sit on the sidelines and wait for time to pass. With mass deportation, book banning, and historical figures taken out of public places are being done. So once again, we ask Simon, Betsy, Rachel, Stanley, and Harry is being used in legal documents, this time for their rights in debt they never had in their lifetime. This is personal for me on many levels. As my great-grandmother Marie Richards, a midwife during the late 1800s and early 1900s, administered care and helped birth babies of boat races on both sides of the Mississippi River. I recall my mother saying she would accompany Grandma over the Mississippi River, more than likely to the Bona Vista. Marie Richards set the stage for my deceased sister Betsy and I to be born in an integrated household. This household, by today's standard, would be considered a civil rights household. They turned no one away that needed help, and if things weren't right, they were ready to fight. Thank you all for coming, and may God bless. I turn it over to Joy.
Thank you, Ms. Gale, and thank you, Inclusive Louisiana. My name is Dr. Joy Banner. I'm the co-founder and co-director of the Descendants Project, and I'm incredibly honored to stand here today alongside Inclusive Louisiana as a descendant of St. John the Baptist Parish and as a descendant of people enslaved in St. James Parish. Thank you all, first of all, for being here. Thank you all for joining us and listening to our history and listening to the story of our ancestors and why we are here today. So we're here to right a grave historical injustice that continues to this day. The importance of burial sites, of cemeteries, that history is documented. And I wanted to share a passage even from the great Frederick Douglass and his experience and his story about grave sites, and in particular the grave of his mother. Frederick Douglass's mother was enslaved at a plantation far away from his, and she could only visit him at night. For Frederick Douglass, his more lengthy attempt to remember his mother could end only with the grave, as the grave of the dead at sea, unmarked and without stone or stake, bowing down on the ground where his life began, his hands, sorry, I forgot to get the rest of his passage. Sorry about that, folks.
No, it's actually helpful. The Instagram live is having a kind of a hard time hearing, so I'm gonna, if you don't mind, you're filming on Instagram. Yeah, if you don't mind, just get real close. It may feel weird, but that way people who are watching
Okay.
will be able to.
Okay, so I will start that passage over again. Again, this is from Frederick Douglass, who gives his account of his experience with trying to find the burial site of his mother. And throughout many of the narratives of enslaved people, there are instances where people are trying to locate the burial grounds of their people, of their ancestors, and how much it means to them when they find those burial grounds. But for Frederick Douglass, let me start again. His more lengthy attempt to remember his mother could end only with her grave is, as a grave of the dead at sea, unmarked and without stone or stake, bowing down on the ground where his life began, his hands shoving aside the late November leaves and pushing down into the cold soil, may have been for Douglass a profoundly private way of recognizing how unsettling, unfinished, and even unattainable the story of his life truly remained. That soil provided, though, one kind of fact he had come to the eastern shore to find. His mother was there somewhere, and so was he. For our ancestors, like Frederick Douglass, like us as descendants, we demand better for our ancestors, our community, and our future. Not far from where we're standing in St. James Parish lies an unmarked cemetery. It's unmarked because the human beings buried there were enslaved during their lifetimes. They never were given proper burials, and their final resting places have never been given the respect that they deserve. And as a result, their descendants, their family members, have not been in turn given that respect by not having that access. Now, yet another multinational corporation, Formosa Plastics, has come to town looking to build yet another toxic plant. And to do that, they're more than willing to disturb the graves of formerly enslaved people buried at the former Winchester plantation. Formosa has a long and controversial history in the river parishes. In the 90s, the company sought to build a large rayon plant in our parish, St. John the Baptist Parish, in our community of Wallace. So 30 years ago, when me and my sister were young girls, we were almost displaced by Formosa Plastics. While this was a free town founded after emancipation by people formerly enslaved in the area. The initiative by Formosa was plagued by scandal that led to the conviction of the then parish president, that led to federal corruption charges and ultimately his imprisonment. But that conviction came too late, and long after some local residents had been pressured by the parish president and his co-conspirator to sell their land to Formosa. We witnessed these events as children, and as a result of Formosa, we were left behind with industrial zoning that set us up to be targeted by further industrial development, that being the Greenfield grain terminal. We still, to this day, have industrial zoning on that land, which also contains the burial sites and graves of unmarked graves of our ancestors. So again, we're here as a moment of triumph for our ancestors, as a moment of hope for our ancestors, and also as a moment for us as descendants, so that we will be able to have access to these burial grounds and to these cemetery sites that are so sacred to us and so central to our identity and to us honoring the stories, the history, the legacies of our ancestors. And with that, I pass it on to my sister, Jo.
Good morning, I'm Jo Banner with the Descendants Project. Today we are continuing a decades-long fight to save our community from the legacy left by Formosa's attempt to industrialize our communities. Just as our ancestors moved between parish lines in St. John and St. James, so has Formosa with their attempts to industrialize the river parishes. Because it's as if it weren't enough to desecrate the one grave site, the same corporation is looking to do the same in St. James Parish. We live in a state where our governor and other politicians preach about protecting heritage and culture. They talk about the legacy of fishing and sugarcane and the cultural rights of the Acadians, as if these parts of our culture do not intersect with the Black communities. What about the cultural rights of the Black residents? We cannot protect the sugarcane or protect the Acadians without also protecting the Black residents and the ancestors of the Africans who were enslaved to the plantations. And what would the Cajun culture even look like without the contributions of people of African descent? Our histories are intertwined. It's time that ours receive the respect and legal protection it deserves. But that respect is exactly what has been denied to us. I won't forget going on that site as we tried to honor the sacred burial sites, the hoops that we had to jump through, the lawyers, all the times, the security, all the times they tried to keep us from our ancestors. And when we finally reached the hallowed ground, the way that we were surveilled, the way that we were policed, the way that we were cold, the way that we were wet, the way that some of us were even sick, even the private security. Never had the badges and incidents of slavery felt so visceral, so real. That's the injustice we're here to end today. I would like to introduce Lenora Gobert, whose amazing research revealed the location of the cemetery and identities of our ancestors buried there. So, Lenora.
Good morning, everybody. I'm Lenora Gobert, and I'm the genealogist who does research on behalf of our community partners. That one's not working? Okay. Everyone is aware there's a cemetery on the former Winchester Buena Vista plantation. And we know this is a place where enslaved people were interred. Formosa is a slave owner. It owns the dead bodies of the enslaved today, as the enslaver Winchesters did from the 1820s to the 1860s. Although the names of most of the individuals interred in the Buena Vista Cemetery are unknown, we do know the names of 5 individuals who are certain were buried in this ground when it was a working plantation. As long as we say their names, they will live with us. Simon was a 10-year-old boy acquired by Winchester in 1821. He was mortgaged at least 6 times, even after death, at a recorded age of 23. Betsy, a 6-year-old girl purchased in 1823, was mortgaged at least 7 times, even after her death was recorded at the age of 18. Rachel, a girl only 4 years old, was purchased with her family in 1828. She was mortgaged at least 5 times, even after her death that was recorded at age 9. And there's Stanley, a 26 or 27-year-old man who was acquired in 1828. He was mortgaged at least 3 times, even after his death, which was recorded at the age of 31. And then there's Harry, who was acquired, mortgaged, and dead at a recorded age of 18. I discovered these individuals by conducting meticulous, time-consuming research in the records of the St. James Parish Courthouse and the papers of the Consolidated Association of Louisiana Planters housed at the LSU Archives. These 2 resources provided me with conveyance and mortgage documents in which the enslaved were mortgaged to raise capital so Benjamin Winchester, owner of the Buena Vista Forced Labor Camp, could continue to run his operation and enrich himself. This eventually led me to find the names of Simon, Betsy, Rachel, Stanley, and Harry, who were noted as being dead on documents mortgaging them. And they continued to be mortgaged for years after they died as almost perpetual assets for financial gain. They remain in this condition under Formosa's ownership. Simon, Betsy, Rachel, Stanley, and Harry deserve no less than to have their lives, along with the many others interred in the burial site, honored and revered at the Buena Vista Plantation Cemetery as the sacred ground that it is, and marked as representatives for the hundreds of enslaved buried on the many plantations whose names we may never know. So thank you for your time, and now I will turn it over to our legal team.
Thank you. Good morning. My name is Kayla Vinson, and I am an attorney on the legal team at the Center for Constitutional Rights, which is a legal organization representing the plaintiffs, Inclusive Louisiana, and the Descendants Project in this lawsuit. 5.5 years ago, the residents of the River Parishes made a remarkable discovery that complemented and supported the oral history that had been passed down in their community for generations. That discovery was a map that showed the exact location of the Buena Vista Plantation Cemetery, where people enslaved on a former sugarcane plantation had worked, died, and been buried. Our clients hoped that this discovery would be a reclamation, making it possible for their community to do what other communities have always done, to honor and dignify their dead, to visit, care for, and protect their cemeteries. For generations, they have faced challenges doing this that come directly as a consequence of slavery and the afterlife of slavery. During slavery, enslaved people were limited in where and how they could be buried and how they could bury their dead. They were not documented in public records, and laws and customs prohibited physical grave markers, like headstones, for example. So when this discovery was made, our clients hoped that they were overjoyed about the opportunity to reclaim these spaces, to dignify the dead, and to give them in death what had been denied to them in life. They wanted to remove the mark of slavery from them, but Formosa Plastics had a different plan. Formosa has put up roadblock after roadblock along the way. As the current owner of the land, Formosa has also exercised authority and control over the cemetery and over the bodies of the people buried there. At every turn, Formosa Plastics has behaved in ways that threaten rather than protect and revere the cemetery, in violation of federal and state law. While our clients and their communities have worked tirelessly to honor the dead and to bring them dignity, Formosa Plastics has met them with threats. Threats of law enforcement action, threats of litigation, and threats and surveillance from private security contractors. Today, our clients say no more. As you heard Ms. Barbara say, this morning we filed a lawsuit in the United States District Court for the Eastern District of Louisiana. We filed that lawsuit under the 13th Amendment to the United States Constitution, which prohibits the badges and incidents of slavery, and also under Louisiana cemetery law. Our clients are asking the court to issue an order declaring that Formosa Plastics has violated their rights to access, to care for, and to protect the sacred grounds of the Buena Vista Plantation Cemetery, and to enjoin Formosa from continuing that unlawful conduct. In the same spirit, they are asking the court to prohibit any interference with the laying of headstones at the cemetery to honor those for whom it is their final resting place. And because the 13th Amendment bars ownership of human beings, even in death, they are also asking that the court end Formosa's control over the cemetery and over the bodies of the people buried in it. Our clients also seek further investigations with their involvement and active participation to determine the existence and location of any other burial grounds on the plantation land that is now owned by Formosa Plastics. Continued forced separation of the plaintiffs in this lawsuit and their community from the burial grounds of their ancestors is an enduring harm of slavery. The Buena Vista Plantation Cemetery is sacred ground, and today our clients are taking another step towards reclaiming it. And with that, we'll open the floor for questions.
I have some questions. Ms. Lenore, can I talk to you first? Sure. Okay, so you've established that these, is it 6 or 5?
5.
5 were owned by Benjamin Winchester.
Correct.
And he mortgaged them over and over.
Correct.
Have you established that they were in fact buried in that cemetery site? Or is that an unknowable thing?
I can't say that I established directly that they're buried there, but we know based on all types of academic research that people have done on slavery and plantations that when people died on the plantation, they were buried on the plantation. Right. So logic.
It's an inference.
It's
based on history
and logic. Yeah, and
Formosa says we don't know who's buried there, right? They've maintained that for 5 years.
Well, we do now.
All right. But that's why I'm asking that question.
Yes.
Ms. Kayla, thank you. What laws, this is Formosa's property. Can you just go through what the law, like, why do your clients have the right to access someone else's property when it's a cemetery? Can you explain what the law is on that?
Yeah, great question. In the state of Louisiana and in under many state laws across the country, folks with loved ones in cemeteries have a right to access those cemeteries regardless of who owns the land on which the cemetery sits.
Is that federal law or state law?
That's under Louisiana state law. Mm-hmm. And you might imagine anytime you want to visit a loved one of yours, what you expect to be able to do is for there to be clear hours when you can go visit, you can go whenever you want, you can put flowers, there are headstones there, right? All of those things state law recognizes are the rights of people who have loved ones in a cemetery.
Okay, so how are you going to establish a connection between those 5 people and your clients as their loved ones, or ancestors?
So slavery establishes that connection, and the way that slavery operated in the river parishes along the Mississippi River and all over the United States, which is that folks who, as we just heard Lenora say, were on a plantation and died, they were then buried there. And we know that the black folks living in the river parishes and throughout the diaspora have connections in the United States to folks enslaved on those plantations.
Do you feel like one of the early challenges to this litigation would be standing, whether your clients have the standing to make this claim? Because there isn't that actual genealogical connection. Like, Betsy is the great-grandmother of Miss Gale, and you know that for a fact.
Well, I think for starters, I will say that you don't have to, loved ones have rights to cemeteries, right? So it doesn't necessarily have to be as direct of connection as you just described under Louisiana law to have access to a cemetery. And part of what will unfold through the lawsuit is a question about what does the 13th Amendment demand about how that state law is applied, right? And so We believe that if we have a clear understanding of how slavery operated, that our clients have to have standing. I mean, that's just what that's the result of our understanding of history, is that both of our clients have standing to bring this lawsuit.
Okay.
The fact
Last
that we're
question.
standing here is
Go.
the standing that we need. I was like, as descendants, the fact that we're standing here is the standing that we need for this. And I just want to say, like, it's frustrating because the conditions that our people were put under means that the answers that the legal courts may want, we can't provide that because of being enslaved. And that's the frustration. That's the reason why it is so important to protect these sites. And we have to go above and beyond to make sure that all of our history is remembered and saved, because these are sacred and special sites for us. And for the generations that come after us, they need those spaces too. And we need to make sure that we are validated by us being here right now as descendants. Thank you.
One more question. Has Formosa acknowledged that people buried at that site are slaves? Have they ever acknowledged that to any of your clients or you?
I will let Formosa and their attorney speak for them. What I can say is that as a part of the process of getting permits, there were archaeological studies that had to be done. There was an early study done by Formosa where the archaeologists believe their archaeologists,
But
yeah.
they backtrack, said we don't know.
Well,
so what I'm asking you is,
the archaeologists said that because of the lack of grave markers, because of what the map shows, because of all of these things, their understanding was that this was a slave cemetery. It is Formosa, the company, that has questioned those findings afterwards. So just want to make that distinction between the archaeologists and the company.
On the site, it is blocked off. On the site, it is blocked and fenced off. So on Formosa's property, they have a fence, half of a fence, around the site that we have put flowers down. So they know that there is a cemetery there.
no, I understand that, but the company has maintained for 5 years that we don't know who's there. And what I'm asking you is, through all this research that you've pulled up and this ongoing discovery of what may be down there, have they ever said, okay, yeah, you're probably right, they're slaves? Have they ever said that to y'all?
To my knowledge, the company has not said that to us. So
I just want to say that the assumption when it comes down to enslaved people and the way that the plantation system works is that we lack information, that we don't have a lot of the information that is missing. We have a lot of information. We have hundreds of years of information the way the slavery system worked. There was a certain logic to plantation spaces. There's order. There are documents. There are ship manifests. There are receipts. Plantation owners kept meticulous records, right? And so what I want us to understand that yes, there are some holes in some specific questions that are sometimes being asked, but you know what? We have a lot of information about the way that the slavery system worked. You know, it's not a question that Louisiana was a slave state. There's not a question of how many people were enslaved in the river parishes. There's not a question of how much of the economy was built on the labor of enslaved people, and that they were denied burial rights and denied different places or access to certain places to be buried. These plantation owners are buried in the cemeteries of churches, but enslaved people are not. And there's a lot of records and a lot of information about that. So I just want to say that, you know, just to emphasize, there is a lot that we know about slavery, the system and its injustices and how it's worked. Is whether or not people want to be held responsible, you know, for the consequences, for the legacies, and for what is owed to our ancestors and to their descendants.
What do you expect or predict the timeline for this lawsuit?
that's a good question around timeline. At this point, the lawsuit has been filed, and so now Formosa will have the opportunity to either file an answer or to put other filings before the court to consider. And so it could be a few months before there's a sort of a next step in the litigation, and it could be years before the litigation is resolved entirely.
Part of my plan when I started this project initially was to not only find out who was buried on the Buena Vista plantation and find out their names if possible, which was an almost impossible task, but also to find out the descendants of some of the people who were on the plantation. Now think about it, these people, for the most part, were so young, they may not have, who knows if they had direct descendants? Obviously Rachel didn't, you know. So we're looking at other people who were enslaved on the plantation who actually made it through slavery, so we know who those descendants are. But they were all in the same condition. They were all in the same condition of slavery. They all experienced the same thing. They just happened not to die within that system and be buried. Am I answering your question?
I guess I was wondering, have you been able to, I guess, trace, you know, any of the direct descendants of these individuals?
Of these individuals. That's what I'm saying. My assumption right now, no is the general question, because my assumption is that they were so young they probably died before they were able to have any descendants. But we don't know that yet. This is ongoing research. What we know so far is that they were in this system that Winchester had of enslaved people, and they died on the under his system. And as my colleagues here said, the way the plantation system worked in slavery, we know they were buried on the plantation. They didn't throw them in the Mississippi River. They had to do something with their bodies. They buried them on the plantation. And so how we dig into those records and what we find, we shall see. And a lot of times the plantation owners kept plantation diaries where they meticulously documented everything about their enslaved people. But if those diaries don't exist, and as far as I know, there's not an existent one for Benjamin Winchester, we can't really say specifically what may have happened to individual people. But we keep looking. And as you said, there are many documents that we have a lot of documents, we have a lot of research that we can still look for, but it's time consuming, but we know these people died and were buried on that plantation. It can't be otherwise. Thank you.
You all may think this lawsuit is frivolous, but we know for sure that our ancestors are out there. My great-great-great-grandfather is buried over there somewhere, and all of his relatives have attended Buena Vista, the Buena Vista Church. And so there is more information that we will be obtaining to find out who is exactly there. We know that our ancestors are there because of how slavery was, how they were treated, and we are not going to let that die. We're going to keep on fighting. There is hope that we will get the answers that we need, because it may be hidden from all of us, but we know that God knows and He can bring it together.
When I talk about my great-grandmother, she buried her daughter, my grandmother, on the Monroe plantation. Even after the Civil War, people still were being buried on the plantation. That is the point we're making. These are our descendants, no matter what. Simon, Rachel, Stanley, Harry, Betsy, they're our descendants. So for Formosa to say that they're not buried there, but they're found in legal documentation on Buena Vista is ludicrous. They can't say that anymore. And just as there are these 5 descendants from the Buena Vista, there are other descendants to be found in land transactions. If there's one thing we know, these land transactions are true because they're claiming land today.
questions?
And more.
Right. Thank you.
Thank you.
Thank you all for coming. God bless.
Thank you. Thank you on social media.
Nice one, go Bear. G-O-V.
Okay.
And you're a G. Where do you live? Where do you live?
I'm okay.
Sound like you're California. Perfect accent.
All four of my grandparents were born in South.
I got it.